So I've been revisiting once again my Etude music magazine project. It's been an on again, off again pursuit of mine for probably 15 years now, maybe longer. I still don't know what year it is. I had been collecting Etude magazines since I was in college. I think I got my first stack of copies for $1 at a thrift shop in Ohio in 1989 or 1990. And here and there I would pick up copies where I could, but it was when the internet came along and eBay and all that I started really amassing what had to be the largest personal collection of those magazines anywhere. I had hundreds of copies, maybe even over 1,000, because there were a lot of duplicates. And it was a lot of fun. I'm a classical musician and with a degree in piano performance, but I also have a degree in musicology, and that made all the little bits that you find in the Etude magazine to be so interesting to me. Etude was primarily aimed at teachers, but they would do legitimate musicological research and interviews and that kind of thing, and that's why I'm looking at this guy tonight, Isidor Philipp, who was kind of a favorite of mine. He was one of Charles Alkan's few friends and is partly responsible for the myth that claimed Charles Alkan died when he was reaching for a copy of the Talmud on an upper shelf in his bookcase, and the bookcase came tumbling down and it crushed poor Alkan to death. I don't think any reasonable person actually ever believed that, but my research when I was studying musicology turned up not pretty reliable, an unquestionable citation that said that this myth was born as a result of a mistranslation of a letter from this guy, Isidor Philipp, to the Italian composer Ferruccio Busoni. And in that letter, Philipp was said to have described that Alkan died surrounded by his books, but that somehow got mistranslated to mean as if he had said that Alkan died engulfed by his books or swallowed by his books or something like that. And it might have actually been Busoni himself who propagated the myth. So it just goes to show you need a good translator once in a while. Anyway, I set up an Etude magazine website a number of years ago, and I guess the main attraction ends up being the covers. And I get it, because some of these covers are really something. There were distinct eras in these things. Like before 1900, the magazine looked kind of like a newspaper. There was some artwork, but it wasn't anything special. Well, I guess that's something interesting for the time. But the cover looked, like a table of contents with a supplementary photo or illustration. It was around 1900, 1901 when the artwork started to become a little more prominent, a little more notable, although the table of contents still took over the cover, much of the cover. I mean, that was the primary reason for the cover, was to have your table of contents. But then sort of end of 1901 and into 1902, the cover became more just devoted to being a work of art on its own merits. And you get really just a headline for what this number was going to be about. They used to call it editions of the magazine. They used to call it numbers. Maybe they still do. And this is one of my favorite issues ever, by the way, of the magazine. The list was epic. List was legend. List was God in his realm. But with these early 1900s copies, it's not just how they looked, because it looks, I don't know how formidable this looks to you as a scan, but the physical copies felt like you were holding a Bible. It was really thick quality parchment, and every page felt like you were turning a year. And the artwork got more and more elaborate as the early 20th century continued for the magazine. But to me, the golden era of covers for the Etude was the 1920s. See, here we are still in the 1900s, and the artwork does get more and more elaborate. But you'll see what I mean when I jump ahead to the 20s. Oh, I loved this magazine so much. If the main attraction of my website is the covers, I guess I can understand that. But to me, it always should have been the content. And I scanned and converted to OCR and transcribed and copy edited and blah blah blah, hundreds and hundreds of these articles. Some of them not really worth my time doing because they're just trifles, but there was some pretty solid stuff in there, and I'm getting ready to transcribe a series of articles by this guy, Isidor Philipp. He's one of the more central figures in the history of piano pedagogy. So, I scanned and everything, all these, the covers and the complete issues, but it wasn't, the intent was not simply to regurgitate the content and be a mini archive.org of this kind of thing. I wanted to make it a coherent and useful site, and it's gone through some iterations. That's another favorite cover of mine. It's gone through some iterations, but it's not what it used to be. It used to actually be a really cool site, and the centerpiece of it all was the search engine. But the search software that I was using was this open source stuff that got abandoned, and it didn't seem wise to leave a whole bunch of unsupported Perl scripts out there up for grabs when anything could happen with that shit. Every single one of these scans is mine, and as you can see, sometimes the covers themselves were not in the best shape. And that's a cool portrait of Beethoven. But let me jump ahead to, let's just say 1920. Oops. Don't remember when the turning point was. That's right, I also scanned a whole bunch of the sheet music. When was the turning point? I don't know, maybe there was none, but it's when they started going full color with, these might be considered kitschy paintings now, but for a mainstream music magazine, and by the way, this magazine was hugely popular. I'd say for a mainstream music magazine, that's pretty elaborate. That's Adelina Patti, renowned opera singer. Every cover of this magazine became like a frameable piece of work. What are my favorites from this era, the 1920s? This is a really cool profile. Could be interpreted a number of ways, I suppose. Yeah, this is a cool portrait of Schubert. And that's his stanchion. Yada-da-dum, ba-yada-da-dum, yadam, bum, 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 bum. So much good stuff in here. But things being what they are, I started to feel a little nervous having over 1,000 copies of this old magazine. Then they all got scanned by archive.org and another entity I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. And it just didn't make sense for me anymore to have, a potential forest fire sitting here. This might be their most famous cover, The Jazz Problem. They had a real hard-on against jazz music throughout the 20s and really since its birth. But I've read those articles and I never really found a good sort of if you can allow yourself to understand where somebody is coming from even when you disagree with them. I never found where they were coming from with their distaste for jazz. I think it was sort of demagogic racism. But they never came right out and called it that. I mean, they did use the typical terminology of the day, or they called them darkies and coloreds and that kind of thing. I don't mean to excuse that, but they did use that sort of language as perhaps opening a little window into their real reasoning or into their real biases. Yeah, here's an anti-jazz cover, The Jazzomaniac and Her Victim. Honestly, she looks alright to me. She really does. That's funny. But I think I said this before. At a certain point in the 20s, it's like every cover became frameable. Every cover became something you'd hang on your wall. That's Benjamin Franklin for you. So I put so many countless hours and hours and hours into this project and spent a bunch of money on software and hosting and all this and this, and it was a relative money pit. I never made a nickel back on all the hours I put into this. And maybe that's not supposed to matter, except this isn't my work, This is I was trying to put together something coherent and useful in a way that nobody else was doing. And I believe I did, but that's solely on account of the search engine that I've never found an equal for. And it wasn't just the covers that were the golden age of the magazine. I think the content in the 1920s and 30s was also its golden age. Starting with the war in the 40s, they really became, I don't know, prone to histrionics, became dogmatic. But you know what, though? Throughout its run, the magazine gave a whole hell of a lot of well-deserved attention to women composers and women performers, as well as Native American music. But their attention to women composers was, I don't know, might surprise the casual observer of this kind of thing. That's a great cover. One thing where they did come up short was they often didn't credit the artist or give you any clue as to what this work of art was, if it was original for the magazine or if they scraped it from somewhere else. This is a favorite cover of mine because Liszt is one of my all-time heroes, but there's a better one. I forget when it was, though. I think it might have been in the 1910s. You talk about somebody that lived an incredible life, not just on its own merits, but in influence. I mean, the world of classical piano to this very day still echoes the influences of Liszt. Oh, this one. This one's so melodramatic. Whither youth. Wish I had a better copy of that one. So I think I started saying earlier that I got rid of all my copies, or virtually all my copies, but I kept all the covers. And I kept the early or turn of the century editions used to have what they called supplements. And they were, you talk about frameable, those were some artworks that were really quite impressive. But I kept all the covers. I still have every single one of these. I start to see the artwork getting generic. Like, this just looks like any old magazine. I don't know. It's probably a composite. I mean, it's obviously a composite, but I don't really see anything interesting about this. Certainly nothing artistic, just in the same sense as some of the earlier stuff. Then again, Teresa Carreño. That's a beautiful cover. But here you got this Santa Claus cover, and as you get into the 40s, it really starts to look different. It really starts to look kind of cheesy, if you ask me. And forget about the 50s. I'm not even going to go there tonight. But yeah, I mean, they just become a lot less artistic as the 40s progress, and then after the war, they got to be really kind of strident, perhaps is the word. But all that's just to say that they rolled with the punches, they rolled with the times. She looks happy, right? It's actually kind of creepy, but they rolled with the times, things change, and blah blah blah. Let's see if I could find that one. Just demonic cover, bright red. No, that's not it. Alright, I'll find it another time. Anyway, the main attraction tonight is this article, which I'm going to transcribe. I mean, it's already transcribed as much as it can be with the OCR software. I use this Abby Fine Reader 11. I think this whole product has been discontinued, but this is, yeah, version 11. There was at least one version after this, 12, and maybe even 13. But it's funny because it gets most of the text pretty well, as you know, as you'll see. But it still doesn't get the flowery headline text. The evolution of piano playing and virtuosity, according to Abby. This says T3 evolution of C piano playing and virtuosity. But it gets most of the regular text fine. I just can't deal with flowery fonts, flowery headline fonts. So I'll just fix that. Piano playing. Virtuosity. Yeah, I graduated from the University of Virtuosity by Isidor Philipp. This article is the first of a series of momentous discussions of the subject by this world-renowned pedagogue, composer and pianist, which will appear exclusively in the Etude music magazine. Every ensuing issue containing these articles will be of immense value to all our readers. And I decided I'm going to transcribe however many of these there are, because Philippe was no joke. Philippe knew what he was talking about. Normally I do this on 2 monitors to give this side and this side as much room as possible, and then leave a lot of room for this panel of the scans. But I don't like the way Screen Recorder works on 2 monitors, so I'm doing this on just 1 right now, just for the sake of this little presentation. In order to understand and trace the development of piano playing and pianistic virtuosity, it is necessary to go back to the days of the predecessors of the piano, the clavichord, the spinet, the virginal, the clavicin. This order of the instruments can be only approximately correct, for the origin of them and the dates of their invention are not known precisely. Moreover, they were perfected step by step. So you can see here where the regular font text gets pretty good OCR, but the flowery headline text does not. And that's fine, can't expect miracles from this OCR stuff. In this latter fact, indeed, lies the first cause of the progress in the art of virtuosity. The works of English, French, Italian, or German composers before the year 1700 give an exact idea of the virtuosity of that period. Yeah, Philippe was a big fan of virtuosity. He was the author of the School of Virtuosity, and that's why he was such a fan of Alcan. Alcan was one of the greatest technical virtuosos of the 19th century, but his playing was just cold as ice, and Philippe seemed to go for that kind of thing. He didn't really key into the emotional aspects of playing. The compositions of the English writers for the virginal present scales and arpeggios for brilliant effects, while the slow pieces are in madrigal style. The personal art of the English virginal players, Gibbons, Bird, Bull, and Purcell, the greatest among them, was based on the popular songs and dances and had a strong influence on the musicians of the 16th and 17th centuries. French, Italian, and German composers of the 16th and 17th centuries treated their clavicins like organs. The handling of these first claviers was so rough that the whole fist was sometimes used in playing, and the Germans have kept the expression organ blows, Orgelschlagen. Most of the published pieces of the period have the inscription for organ or clavicembalo. The lively compositions of these masters consist of a dance. Okay, I missed that one. Consist of dance movements, minuets, rigadoons, gavottes, jigs, bourrées, and another thing Abby doesn't do real well, doesn't do at all actually, is get the ligatures. So that's where I have to go in and fill those in. Frescobaldi, the two Pasquinis, Pasquini, and Durante were masters of rare genius, but the French clavicin players from Chambalnier, I'm not familiar with that name, to Couperin, the Italian Domenico Scarlatti, and Handel and Bach, the two great Germans. These give evidence of the immense advance made in virtuosity within a short time. One of the things that always that I debate as I'm going through this is, should I fix this gap between the semicolon and the parenthesis? Because if you look over here, there is a gap, and there is a gap here, but that's just typesetting. Grammatically or punctuationally, there's not supposed to be a space, and there wouldn't be if it weren't for the justified nature of the typesetting. And there's the Chambonnaise again, and his two pupils, Engelbert and Labège, sorry, I don't know who that is, were brilliant virtuosi in their day. Couperin the Great, but the most famous name of all in this period of the glory of the clavicin is that of Francois Couperin. Oh, and they got a C, I forget what that is. No, I have a lot of these that's not it. There it is. I have a lot of these ligature codes memorized, and if I don't have it memorized, they're incremental, so they're not hard to figure out. They're incremental alphabetically. Francois Couperin, called the Great to be distinguished from other members of his family. His book, The Art of Playing on the Clavicin, is still, to this day, a work valuable to consult for its advice on the position of the body, the pose of the hands on the keyboard. Once in a while I stop to check My eyes are mostly focused on this side, but when I see a questionable hyphen or something like that, because I don't know, their style changed over the years, and they sometimes hyphenated words, then they didn't. Anyway, hands on the keyboard, fingering by changing fingers, and the method of producing a beautiful tone quality by a close pressure of the keys. The works of Couperin contain a profusion of the ornaments that were necessary at that period in order to make the illusion of sustaining the tone, but nevertheless they are distinguished by nobility and grace of style, and for great wealth of imagination. In some of these pieces the musical foundation is so noble that, if they were freed from the ornaments and reduced to the simple melodic line, they would lose none of their beauty. That's interesting, because I always questioned ornamentation in music. I find it kind of it depends, I guess, how tastefully done it is, but I just find it kind of an irritant. Or, I mean, ornamentation in the Baroque era and pre-Baroque eras, that is. As has been said above, the use of ornaments was due to the lack of sonority in the clavecin tone. I hope I'm pronouncing clavecin right. Clavecin. The composers tried to prolong the effect of the single tone by means of ornaments, with the result that they ended in making ornaments a habit. They developed thus almost a style in ornaments. Oh crap, here I am again. Can't remember what this one was. There it is. Francois Couperin advised the conscientious execution of the embellishments, and I'm going to do this footnote. Couperin, Complete Works, Durand, Daquin, Dangilbert, Dandru, Lallet. Works, Durand, Rameau, Complete Works, Durand, German artist. That's some pretty tiny text, and I gotta hand it to Abby Feinreader. Looks like it got almost all of it, but of course it doesn't do the ligatures.